The silence was too clean to trust. Machines blinked and murmured all around me, but underneath them was a kind of stillness that didn't belong in a room full of heartbeats and beeping monitors. It took a moment to understand where I was, then another to realize what had happened. I had stroked out. That was the phrase. Not the kind you whisper with concern, the kind you spit out between rushed updates in sterile corridors. She stroked out, mild but still. Recovery is uncertain. They didn't. When I turned my head toward the only chair in the room, I saw my son Jason, legs crossed, phone glowing. His mouth moved in a whisper, probably texting someone updates, or maybe complaining about the hospital food. I waited for his eyes to meet mine. I knew it in my bones before the nurse confirmed it. My right arm was slow, my mouth dry, my mind fogged like a car window in winter. He glanced up and gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey Mom, you're awake. That's good." "Jason," I said, or tried to. It came out more like a wheeze. He stood, walking over, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves, as if stepping into my space required grooming. I remembered when he used to trip over himself just to bring me a glass of water, back when love didn't look so formal. "You're doing well, Mrs. Alvarez," he said with a soft grin. "Do you want me to call your family?" A young nurse with warm eyes walked in. His name tag read Andre. I didn't answer right away. My eyes moved to Jason. His fingers were back on the phone, thumbs dancing like I wasn't even there. "She's good," Jason cut in. "She's got me." His voice was cheerful enough to sound reassuring to a stranger, but there was a tightness underneath. He left, and the door clicked closed with a whisper of finality. Andre nodded politely. "We'll be moving you out of ICU in 2 days if things keep going this way. We'll discuss long-term care options soon. Take your time." Jason slipped his phone into his blazer pocket. The way he dressed now always made me feel underdressed, even in a hospital gown. He sighed. "Okay, here's the thing, Mom. We've already spoken to a couple caseworkers about next steps. There's a facility 2 miles from our house. Quiet, modern, good reviews. Alicia toured it yesterday." I stared at him. "You're talking about a nursing home?" He winced. "It's not like that. It's transitional. You need rehab, monitoring, and you can't stay in your apartment by yourself." He smiled like I was a child recounting an imaginary friend. "Exactly. It's been a good run, but let's not be romantic about this. I've lived there for 28 years. He leaned forward, hands on the railing of the bed. "I love you, Mom, but Alicia and I have a baby on the way. You've had a stroke. We can't juggle everything. You're becoming—" He paused. "A long one." I finished it for him in my head before he said it out loud. "A liability," he whispered. "There," he said it. My breath left my chest in a way I couldn't quite describe. Not pain, not anger, just subtraction. Like a piece of me had been cleanly cut out, and now there was just open space. He stood back up, tugging his blazer sleeve back into place. "Don't make this harder than it is. The papers are just temporary, power of attorney for medical stuff. Already signed them for now. We'll update everything once you're settled." I didn't sign. "You did," he said gently, almost sympathetically. "Right after the MRI. You were loopy on sedatives, but I cleared it with the staff. They said it was fine." He didn't see my face in that moment. Not really. He saw a process, an obligation, a speed bump. I stared at the ceiling, white, pockmarked, blinking gently with the reflection of machines. "Don't worry," Jason added as he turned to leave. "You won't have to lift a finger. We've got this handled." He didn't say goodbye. That evening, while nurses changed shifts and wheelchairs hummed past my room, I lay staring out the window. My vision pulsed faintly, the afterglow of a minor stroke settling like dust into my skull. He looked vaguely familiar. Trim beard, warm brown eyes, dark blue button-up shirt, a folder tucked under his arm. A knock on the door roused me. It wasn't a nurse. That's when it clicked. He'd been at the nurse's station during intake, observing, noticing. "Hi," he said. "Sorry to drop in late. I'm Daniel. I handle elder care legal transitions for the hospital network." "I'm not here to push anything," he said, taking a seat without being asked. "But I saw your file cross my desk. Something didn't sit right." He lowered his voice. "You're listed as having signed over full financial and medical authority. The signature's wobbly. and time-stamped less than an hour after high-dose sedatives. I swallowed. I looked at him through dry, tired eyes. Did you knowingly agree to that? No, I said. It came out clearer than I expected. He nodded slowly. Then we have options. I couldn't cry. I was too tired, but something cracked open in my chest. A breath I didn't know I'd been holding since the stroke. Daniel stood and passed me a business card. When you're ready, call. I don't work for your son. I work for truth. When he left, the room felt less hostile, just for a moment. I tucked the card under my pillow like a relic and watched the hallway light flicker softly through the door gap. I left the hospital 3 days later, in a wheelchair that squeaked when it turned. No fanfare, no balloons, just a discharge nurse with a clipboard and Jason behind me, tapping on his phone like it owed him rent. They'd emptied my apartment while I was still in the ICU. I didn't even get to say goodbye to my wallpaper, the one with the faded roses Gerald and I put up the first year we moved in. 28 years of life folded into boxes I hadn't packed, stacked in someone else's garage. Alicia's waiting at the house, he said, as if that would comfort me. As if the woman who hadn't visited once since my stroke was some kind of reward at the finish line. Jason called it streamlining the transition. I called it what it was, a quiet eviction disguised as a kindness. They had prepared a guest room for me on the first floor, near the laundry machines. Their house was clean and cold, everything white or gray, like a showroom. Not a photo on the walls, not a book on a shelf, the kind of house you dust more than you live in. Alicia gave me a tour I hadn't asked for, the bathrooms through here. We cleared out the closet. If you need anything, there's a call button we installed near the bed. A call button, like I was a service request. I stood in the doorway, staring at the twin bed pressed against the far wall. No headboard, no chair, just a laminated instruction card taped to the dresser with bullet points titled Safety and Routines. But they didn't. They left me there, like a guest at the wrong hotel. Jason set my bag on the floor like he was delivering groceries. We'll help you get settled, Mom. The first morning was the hardest. But there was no teapot here, no geraniums, only the hum of their fridge upstairs and the distant sound of someone, probably Alicia, on a Peloton. I woke before sunrise, the way I always did. My body still remembered its duties: morning tea, email, the plant watering schedule that lived in my head like second nature. I sat on the edge of the bed, toes brushing the cold floor, and stared at the blank wall ahead. I'd given birth to a man who now needed a wall between us. By noon, Jason peeked in. Feeling okay? I nodded. Good. We're heading out to meet some friends for brunch. There's yogurt in the fridge. You should rest. I wanted to ask if I was allowed to open the fridge, but I just said, thanks. He left. The door clicked behind him with the finality of someone turning a page, one I wasn't written on. Later that afternoon, I dug out my old phone and dialed the number on the card Daniel had given me. He picked up, on the second ring. I was hoping you'd call, he said. I didn't have the energy for pleasantries. Can you come here? There was a pause. Of course. We met at the park 3 blocks from the house. I told Alicia I needed fresh air. She offered me a protein bar on the way out, then closed the door before I could refuse. You walked here? He asked, concerned. I'm not dead, I said. Just slower now. Daniel stood near the duck pond in a charcoal coat, holding a folder. He smiled. Just barely. What's the situation? I need to know what my son's done with my accounts, what I signed, what he has access to. Daniel opened the folder. You signed a temporary power of attorney, but we can revoke that. I already drafted the paperwork. Still intact, but we can update it if needed. Add protections. Shift beneficiaries. I took a breath. I want to remove Jason. And my will. He blinked. You're sure? Let me put it this way, I said. If I vanished tomorrow, he'd sell my ashes for furniture space. We spent the next 2 hours going over the details. Daniel explained every clause like a patient teacher. No rushing, no talking over me. I listened, nodded, some. At one point, he hesitated. Do you have anyone else you'd want to name as your legal representative? No, I said, just you. I looked at the pond. A little boy was feeding a duck with a piece of crust. He wasn't asking for anything in return, just delighting in the giving. Daniel didn't react, but something in his posture softened. All right then, Let's build this together. That night, I returned to the house, cold in the bones but calm in the chest. I climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling. My stroke hadn't killed me. It had awakened something. Jason thought he was holding the pen. This wasn't just about a signature, it was about story, about who gets to write the final chapter. Jason didn't mention it, but I heard the faint click of the new mechanism when he came down for breakfast. I was sitting at the small table in the kitchen corner, if you could call it sitting, mostly. I perched, like I was afraid of leaving a wrinkle in the chair cushion. Jason poured coffee, stirred in too much sugar, and nodded toward me like I was the receptionist at a dentist's office. He wasn't. The next morning, I noticed the locks had been changed on the upstairs study. Fine, I said. Sleep okay? Great, we're having someone from the facility call this week. They'll do an evaluation routine stuff. Just be open-minded, all right? Just wondering how honest I should be. I watched the steam from his mug twist toward the ceiling. Will they be asking how often I'm allowed to open the fridge? He looked at me, startled. What? He gave a polite laugh, the kind people use when they're not sure if they're being threatened or teased. Of course you can use the fridge, Mom, but we keep certain meal kits portioned out, makes things easier. For whom? I nodded, slowly, and returned to my tea. The conversation was over before it began. The door to the upstairs office had been a subtle shift, but the next sign wasn't subtle. I checked the coat hooks, the bench cubby, even under the umbrella stand. I went to retrieve my handbag from the front hallway, where I'd left it the day before, only to find it gone. Alicia found me crouched in the foyer, breath shallow. Oh, she said, with a brightness that always struck me as forced. I moved it. We didn't want anything getting misplaced with the baby's stuff coming in. She handed it to me like it was an errant umbrella, then added, we put it in the upstairs closet, just for safekeeping. Her voice was chipper, but her eyes were calculating. Some losses happen loudly. Some arrive on tiptoe. My chest fluttered, not fear, not anger, something more ancient. The same slow churn I felt years ago when I realized Gerald wasn't coming home from the hospital. Not this time. That evening, I returned to my room early and closed the door with a click that felt ceremonial. I didn't keep it for legality. I kept it because it reminded me I used to have a life with walls that were mine. From beneath the bed, I pulled the accordion folder I'd packed without telling them. My old bank statements, birth certificate, a small notebook filled with contacts and passwords. Some papers were yellowing. One had Gerald's signature from 1992. It smelled like the filing drawer in our old bedroom. At the back of the folder was the new draft of my will, signed and notarized the day before. Daniel's firm had already filed it with the county. My assets, such as they were, would bypass Jason entirely. Instead, they would go to a scholarship fund under my name, and to Daniel as executor, an odd sort of heir, but the only one who'd ever asked how I wanted things handled. Jason didn't know yet, but soon, he'd feel the shift. 2 days later, I was home alone. Jason and Alicia had gone to a birthing class. I offered to help prep meals before they left, and they declined. Alicia said, it was all being delivered anyway. No point cooking when the nutritionist has it covered. I sat on the back porch, after they left, wrapped in a faded cardigan over my lavender sweater. I'd brought out a small notebook, the same one I'd used to write lesson plans back when I taught 6th grade English. It was the only object that didn't feel borrowed in this house. As I scribbled down notes, something caught my eye. The mailbox flag was up. I hadn't noticed before. Jason always retrieved the mail. I moved carefully, still stiff from the stroke, and made my way down the short stone path. The air was brisk, sharp enough to wake. Inside the box were 3 envelopes. 2 for Jason, 1 for me. My name was handwritten. In deliberate cursive. It was from my old neighbor, Ruth, back from the apartment complex I'd left behind. She'd heard about the stroke through the grapevine and wanted to send her love. The letter was simple, even clumsy. A bit about her new cat, a recipe for cornbread, a line about missing our crossword mornings. I opened it on the porch steps. I didn't realize I was crying until a drop fell on the paper. This woman, who owed me nothing, who gained nothing from writing, had thought of me, and the people whose names filled my emergency contacts list hadn't visited once. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. Then I opened my laptop, borrowed but still logged into Jason's Wi-Fi, and opened a new document. I began typing slowly, fingers unsure, but certain of the direction. I wrote a letter, not to Jason, not to Alicia, to me. It said, "You're not invisible. You're not broken. They needed a scapegoat, not a mother. You're not a liability. You're a survivor with a ledger full of memories they'll never inherit." The house always shifted in tone. When Jason and Alicia were gone, it became oddly louder in its silence. Air vents hissing, distant clocks ticking, the refrigerator motor growling to life like a warning. Without them pacing the halls, micromanaging their world of routines and boundaries, I felt like the walls finally breathed. I printed it, folded it once, and tucked it under my pillow. That morning, I noticed they'd left in a rush. 2 coffee cups on the counter, a dish towel flung carelessly across the sink, and Jason's laptop bag still hanging from the dining chair. He'd left with his tablet instead. It was a small thing, but sometimes, small things are invitations. I walked slowly through the living room, glancing toward the stairs. The office door, newly rekeyed just last week, was ajar. I stood in front of it longer than necessary, listening for any creak, any sound of a delayed return. Nothing, just the hollow hum of their curated absence. I pushed the door open, unlocked. The laptop sat open on the desk. I didn't touch it. It wasn't a large room, just enough for a desk, 2 chairs and a built-in cabinet wall. But Jason had claimed it like a throne room, complete with framed awards and minimalist shelves that held more ego than function. Instead, I turned to the drawer behind the chair, the one I'd watched him lock twice in the past week. It slid open with ease. Inside were folders, precisely labeled, lined in plastic sleeves. Medical proxy, estate management, LTC proposals, bank adjustments, all names I recognized. But one folder in particular made my throat tighten. Mom, transition timeline. The first page was a bulleted list, color-coded. I opened it. Contact Golden Oaks Assisted Living. Transfer POA authority to estate manager. Close joint checking account. Confirm life insurance beneficiary switch. Schedule moving truck. Use weekday for less attention. Pre-draft condolence language for social media post. I read it again. Pre-draft condolence language. The last one stopped me cold. They were writing my ending in advance. Not waiting, not watching, planning it like a relocation, like a scheduled post. I flipped the page. A calendar. On it, my name appeared as if I were a piece of furniture. Finalize, move out. April 3. Notate extended family, email blast. April 4. Property consultation, her remaining assets. April 5. This wasn't care, this wasn't worry. I closed the folder. It was elimination. Back in my room, I sat on the bed without removing my shoes. I held the folder in my lap, like it might twitch. I could hear the washer running behind the wall, an innocuous sound, but it grated at my ribs now. Every noise felt sharper. There was still time to act, before the timeline caught up to me. "I need to see you," I said. "Tonight. Is everything okay?" I called Daniel. He picked up immediately. I thought about the list, the color-coded bullets, the moving truck, the absence of anything resembling love. "I think they're waiting for me to disappear," I said. Daniel arrived just before sunset. He parked a block away and walked to the house so as not to raise suspicion. When he reached a condolence post bullet, his brows pinched. We met on the side patio, tucked behind the garden bed. Jason never watered. I handed him the folder without saying a word. He sat on the concrete stoop and began flipping through. "They're not planning your care," he said finally. "They're planning your erasure." I nodded. "I want it all locked down. Legally, no access to anything I haven't explicitly consented to. I want to update my directives, reissue my POA under my own terms, and name you executor publicly, not just in a file." He didn't argue, just opened his bag, pulled out a folder thicker than the one I'd given him. "I've already started drafting the amendments." "You're not powerless." He looked up at me. I stared at the garden. A single weed had pushed through the mulch near the fence, resilient, uninvited, alive anyway. "I know," I said, "but I'm not invisible either. I want them to see what they lost." After Daniel left, I went back inside and found a quiet place, behind the coat closet where I hid the original folder. Jason might suspect I'd been in the office, But he wouldn't find that copy unless he stripped the walls. That was fine. I wanted him uncertain. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was positioning. The night passed quietly, but not sleepily. I lay in bed, one hand resting on the folded letter under my pillow, the other tracing the ceiling shadows cast by the hallway nightlight. The next morning, Jason returned from his morning jog, breathing hard like he'd been sprinting away from something. Alicia was in the kitchen on her phone, voice bright, talking baby clothes with someone. He passed by me, without a word. But I noticed the look in his eyes when he passed the office door, half checking if it had moved, half hoping I hadn't noticed what he'd left behind. Good. Doubt. Let him feel what I had felt for weeks now. Jason didn't notice anything was different. On Tuesday morning, I received a message from Daniel, but something in me had changed. I had stopped bracing for kindness. The moment I released that hope, something settled in my chest. Not bitterness, clarity. He still came and went like I was a backdrop to his morning routine. A coffee mug here, a reminder to his wife there. Alicia gave me polite smiles, but they were the kind that closed quickly, like an umbrella on a dry day. Empty formality. The filings are complete. The county clerk will send confirmation within 48 hours. You're legally secure now. I replied with 2 words, thank you. Then I turned off my phone, set it on the dresser, and made tea for myself, not because I was expected to, but because I wanted to. By noon, I was standing in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. No, please. No curiosity. I opened the door. Jason's head poked out from the upstairs railing. Can you get that, Mom? And there she stood. A woman about my age, dressed in a quilted blue coat and practical shoes. She clutched a small white gift bag and wore the strained look of someone unsure if they were about to be hugged or punched. Marcia? I asked. She nodded, blinking fast. I heard about the stroke. I thought maybe, if it wasn't too late, I could visit. Marcia had been my friend once. We'd worked in the same school district for nearly 20 years. She'd stood next to me when Gerald was buried, but we'd lost touch, gradually, after Jason's wedding. She said something Alicia didn't like, and after that, the invitations stopped. I stepped aside. You want tea? We sat at the breakfast nook, the only place in the house that had a hint of warmth, likely because it caught sunlight through the bay window, not because it welcomed conversation. Marcia laid the gift bag between us, then reached for my hand before I could stop her. I didn't know until Ruth called, she said, her voice cracking. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I nodded. I'm glad you're here now. We talked about old students, about our knees that hurt in the cold, about how little things, laundry, cinnamon toast, radio static, sometimes triggered memories, so vivid they felt like hauntings. And then, gently, she asked, Are you okay here? I hesitated. Honesty felt dangerous, but lying felt worse. I'm safe, I said. That's not always the same thing. Her brow furrowed, but she didn't push. I don't want to be rude, she said, reaching into her coat, but I brought something else. She pulled out a folded manila envelope. Inside were copies of a group photo, the 5th grade team, back in '98. We were all standing on the playground, arms draped over each other's shoulders. Marcia and I were laughing at something just out of frame. I stared at it like it was a window to another version of me. You kept this? Of course. I kept a lot of things, she said. We all did. Jason came downstairs, 10 minutes later. He froze mid-step when he saw her. Mrs. Davis, he said, surprised. What a surprise. She stood and gave a small, respectful smile. Hello, Jason. It's been a while. His posture stiffened. Is everything okay? I spoke before she could answer. She came to check on me. Unlike most people, Jason's eyes flashed. Not anger, not yet, but discomfort. That fine line people walk when their narrative is challenged in public. Well, that's thoughtful, he said flatly. Marcia collected her coat. I'll let you both get back to your day. I walked her to the door. She squeezed my arm. Call me any time. I mean that. I nodded. I believe you. When I closed the door, Jason was still standing in the middle of the kitchen. You know, Mom, he started, it's important to keep boundaries. People get dramatic. She's not dramatic, I said. She's decent. He scoffed, then turned back up the stairs. But the air between us had shifted. He knew someone had been let in. And not just physically. That night, after dinner, a meal Alicia plated and left on the counter without a word, I pulled out a fresh notebook. At the top, I wrote, "Visitors, I would welcome, if I had a place of my own. Marcia, Ruth, Daniel, myself." I underlined that last name twice. Then I packed a small suitcase. Not to run, just to remind myself I still could. I didn't tell Jason I'd packed a suitcase. It sat behind the sliding panel of my closet, zipped and waiting. Not out of fear, but as a reminder, a symbol, one soft-sided truth, that I could still walk out of this house with less weight on my shoulders than they had placed in my chest. The next morning was overcast. The light filtered through the kitchen windows in a dull gray wash, making everything look colder. Jason had left early for work, and Alicia sat at the island bar, scrolling on her phone. She barely looked up. As I poured my tea, "Did you sleep okay?" she asked absently, still tapping her screen. "Well enough," I said, wrapping both hands around the warm mug. "Marcia brought me something yesterday." Alicia's brow twitched. "Marcia? An old friend, from the school district. We used to teach together. Jason knows her." Alicia didn't hide the tight purse of her lips. "You should let us know when you have visitors, just so we're not caught off guard." "Why would that matter?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "It's not about control," she said, too quickly. "It's about safety, privacy, boundaries." "Whose?" I asked. Her face went blank for a beat. Then she smiled, one of those small, practiced ones that never touched her eyes. "We're all adjusting." Later that day, I asked Alicia if I could take a walk on my own. She nodded, but followed up with a cautious, "Don't overdo it." I didn't tell her Daniel would be meeting me 2 blocks away by the old fountain on Wellington Green. He stood under a leafless tree, wrapped in a brown scarf, holding a manila envelope, like a question. "I had the county expedite the final seal," he said. "It's official now. Your will is untouchable, your rights protected. Even if Jason tries something, it won't hold." I exhaled slowly, a kind of relief I hadn't allowed myself in weeks. "I also found something else," he added, opening the envelope. Inside was a printed copy of a revised insurance policy, one Jason had filed after my stroke. He'd attempted to shift the beneficiary to his name without notifying me. It had been rejected, thanks to a clerical check. But the intent was there. I stared at the paper like it was a foreign language. "Thank you," I whispered. Daniel hesitated, then said, "Do you want to move forward with the final step, the public notice?" "Yes," I replied without thinking. "I want him to know this isn't just a legal matter, it's a reckoning." When I returned to the house that afternoon, Jason was already home. His laptop sat open on the kitchen island. He looked up when I stepped inside, eyes alert but tired. "We need to talk," he said, as if rehearsed. "Do we?" He pushed the laptop aside and folded his hands like a mediator. "Alicia and I have noticed you've been doing a lot lately. Paperwork, phone calls, visitors." "You mean I've been living?" He tilted his head, tone shifting. "You've had a serious health episode, Mom. I'm trying to help, but if you start making major legal changes, especially under duress, that could impact your long-term care." I took a step closer. "What exactly are you worried about, Jason?" "That I'm not as helpless as you hoped." He frowned. "That's not fair." "No. What's not fair is someone trying to erase their mother while she's still breathing. What's not fair is planning condolence posts before I've even left the house." His mouth fell open slightly. A flicker of guilt, recognition. I pressed forward. "I've seen the file, Jason, the timeline, the instructions. You were going to box me up like an old appliance and put a bow on the space I left behind." "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," I cut in. "You meant every bullet point." The room pulsed with silence. Then, slowly, I laid the sealed envelope Daniel had given me on the kitchen island. "This is my final estate plan. Legally registered. You're no longer my beneficiary. You're not the executor. And you're certainly not the hero of this house." He reached for it like it was radioactive. "You gave it all to that lawyer?" I looked him in the eye. "I gave it to someone who treated me like a person, not a problem." His face twisted. Anger flickered, then faltered. "You're making a mistake," he said. I picked up my tea, still warm from the morning. No, Jason. I made the mistake of believing you still saw me as your mother. I returned to my room, closed the door gently behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. My teacup trembled just slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the weight of release. There would be more fallout, words flung, stories twisted, but the important part had already happened. I had taken myself back. Jason didn't speak to me for 3 days. I didn't mind. I'd spent longer than that in a silent marriage, and decades longer raising a son who thought maturity meant volume. Silence wasn't punishment. It was space, air to breathe, a boundary drawn in something deeper than words. Alicia, on the other hand, kept up the performance. She asked how I was feeling, but always while looking at her phone. She made meals without asking if I'd already eaten. She left wellness brochures on the kitchen counter, some for assisted living, others for age-appropriate spiritual retreats. The subtext was clear. They couldn't undo my signature, so they'd settle for pushing me out by psychological erosion. But I'd seen what erosion looked like. I'd taught poetry for 25 years. Even rivers carve stone with enough patience. I wasn't stone. I was already in motion. On the 4th day, Daniel sent me a photo. It was a glossy proof of a printed newspaper page. The senior advocate column, circulation small but reliable, had published a public notice. The estate of Eleanor Alvarez has been legally revised and secured under her own management. No family or third party has access to financial or legal decisions. He captioned it. Sometimes ink is louder than apology. I stared at it for a long time. Not out of fear, but out of something close to closure. It was done. That afternoon, I took a cab to the public library. The building smelled the same as it had 30 years ago. Dust, hope, and that dry, papery hush that made you want to whisper even when no one else was there. I hadn't visited since before the stroke. They'd installed new chairs, repainted the walls, but the local history shelf was still in the same corner, untouched. I browsed with no intention of checking anything out, just touching the spines of books I remembered loving. A woman in her 20s was shelving returns. She wore a navy cardigan and earbuds that dangled like vines. She looked up and smiled when I passed. "Do you need help finding something?" "Just looking," I said. "I used to teach." "Oh," she beamed. "I'm studying to be one." And just like that, we talked about teaching strategies. Students who resist grammar but write essays that break your heart. About the joy of seeing someone's eyes light up when they understand metaphor for the first time. "I'm scared," she said, eventually. "The world feels like it eats people like us alive." I nodded. "That's because it does. But some of us learn how to grow new skin." She asked for my name. I gave it. She paused. "Are you the one who—" "Yes," I said. "The woman who changed her will." Her eyes widened, but there was no judgment. "Good," she whispered. When I got back to the house, the wind had picked up, leaves scratched the windows and the sky was low and bruised with storm clouds. The light in the hallway had burned out. Jason hadn't replaced it. I found him in the garage, rummaging through storage bins. His back was to me. When he turned, he held a box labeled Mom's Winter Coats. "What are you doing?" I asked. He froze, then forced a smile. "I was going to make some room for the baby stuff. These coats are old." "Those coats are mine." "Right," he said, brushing dust from the lid. "I just—" "No," I cut in. "That's the problem. You thought. Without asking. You've been doing it for months." Jason set the box down with a soft thud. He looked tired, less angry than before, more hollow. "I didn't expect this," he muttered. "Didn't expect what?" "That I wouldn't lie still while you restructured my life like a spreadsheet." He didn't answer. I leaned on the doorframe. "You're not evil, Jason, but you are entitled. And entitled people mistake comfort for correctness." "I wanted to protect you," he said. "After the stroke, I panicked. I thought if I just got ahead of it." "You planned my disappearance." He flinched, but didn't deny it. "I gave up a lot to raise you," I said, "but I didn't give up being a person. I won't let you pretend I did." Jason sank onto a folding chair beside the workbench. His hands trembled, just slightly. I remembered those hands as a boy's, sticky with grape jelly and dreams. Now they looked unsure, and older than mine. "I thought you'd be proud," he said quietly, "that I took charge." I walked over and gently placed the box of coats back on the shelf. Then I turned to him. Taking charge isn't the same as taking control. That night, I wrote a short letter. Jason, one day, your child will ask where I went. I hope you'll tell them the truth, that I didn't leave to hurt you. I left because I remembered who I was before you tried to forget it. Your mother, Eleanor. I didn't leave it out. Not yet. But I placed it in the same envelope as the photograph Marcia gave me. The one with our arms linked and our smiles wide, and tucked it into my suitcase. There would be a time to go. It was just no longer a matter of if. The guest room never stopped feeling like a waiting area. It was too clean, the walls too blank, the bed too firm, like no one had ever slept in it for more than a night. There were no corners in the room. Not really, just right angles, where soft things should have lived. Not a single object held history. No chipped mug on the nightstand, no scuff on the closet door, no loose thread on the curtains. It felt curated, like a catalog page. Or worse, like a stage set, waiting for a character who'd already been written out. I sat on the bed the morning after the garage conversation, the envelope, with my letter to Jason, resting beside me like a companion I wasn't sure I was ready to introduce. A light rain tapped on the window, the kind that sounds like a quiet knock, asking, "Are you still there?" I was, and I was ready to decide what that meant. Later that afternoon, I asked Alicia if I could borrow the car, just for an errand. Her lips tightened, but she handed over the keys without much fuss. "Can I ask where you're going?" "To see an old friend," I said. "Someone I forgot I still had." She didn't ask more. She didn't care to. I drove to the little apartment complex near the elementary school. The buildings hadn't changed much. Same brick walls, same drooping gutters, same patchy landscaping. But the parking lot had a new coat of paint and a sign that read, "Quiet Community. Tenants over 55 welcome." I smiled to myself. Ruth met me at the door of Unit 6B. She opened it wide before I could even knock. "You came," she said, grinning in her fuzzy slippers. "I told you I would." Inside, the apartment smelled like lemon polish and something baking. The couch sagged from love, not neglect, and every wall held a piece of her life: photos, postcards, a framed embroidery that read, "Be stubborn about your joy." We talked over cinnamon tea and shortbread cookies. She asked how I was really doing. I told her everything. Not just the legal parts, or the practical ones. The emotional erosion, the ache of being spoken to like a duty instead of a mother. The moment I realized that if I stayed, I'd vanish. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, she only said, "So what are you going to do next?" That night, I sat at the small writing desk in Ruth's guest room, a narrow space with floral wallpaper and a lamp shaped like a tulip. She'd offered to let me stay the night, and I'd accepted. Not out of necessity, but to feel what it was like to be wanted somewhere without condition. I pulled the envelope from my purse, the one with the letter and photo, and replaced it with something else. My new return address. The one Daniel helped me finalize earlier that week. A place in a senior co-op, 5 miles away. One I'd quietly toured during my walks while Jason and Alicia worked or argued about crib placement. It wasn't glamorous, no pools or fitness classes, but it had a community garden and a shared library shelf, and a front door that would lock from the inside. I sealed the envelope and placed a stamp on it. No drama, no grand finale, just direction. Back at Jason's house the next morning, the air had shifted. He greeted me in the kitchen, leaning on the island like a boy caught smoking behind the gym. "You disappeared," he said. "I left a note." I didn't read it. "Then we're even," I said, "because I've stopped listening." His jaw tensed. I didn't flinch. "I'm moving out, Jason, in 3 days. He blinked. "Where?" "To somewhere small. Mine. You don't need to know more than that." "You're still recovering," he said. "You need support." "No, Jason, you need control. I just need peace." He stood silent for a beat, then walked out of the room. It was the most honest exchange we'd had in years. I spent the next day packing. My things were few: folded sweaters, old notebooks, 3 books I loved enough to carry again. Everything else had already been given away, donated or released. The coats I'd fought for stayed on the shelf. Let Alicia try to fill them. They'd never fit her, anyway. On the final night, I walked the hallway once more. Every door closed. Every room quiet. Jason in his office. Alicia reading in bed. A nursery with no child yet, just potential, hanging like fog. They didn't offer to help me load the car. I didn't expect them to. The morning I left, the sun had the kind of clarity that made shadows look sharp. Like the light had made a decision too. I folded the last sweater into my small suitcase, navy blue, the kind with quiet wheels and a stiff handle. My shoes were lined along the wall, but I only packed 2 pairs. I wouldn't need heels where I was going, just flats and courage. Jason didn't come downstairs. Alicia wasn't home. I heard the click of her car leaving before sunrise, an early prenatal appointment, or maybe just distance. I moved slowly, not because of weakness but intention. I wanted to remember this, not as a victory, but as proof that I had not vanished, that I had not gone quietly like they expected. I paused in the hallway, staring at a photo they had framed near the nursery door. Jason at his wedding, laughing beside Alicia, champagne in hand. I wasn't in it, not cropped out, just never invited into frame. I turned the photo face down. In the kitchen, the counter was cluttered with a box of protein bars and a bottle of prenatal vitamins. A scrap of notebook paper was stuck under a coffee mug. It read, "Pick up more formula samples. Mom may try to guilt us into babysitting." The word mom wasn't underlined, but it hit like it was. I didn't take the note. I didn't need to. I left something else. Instead, an envelope. On the front, Jason. Inside, the letter I had rewritten in Ruth's guest room. Firmer, sharper, less poetic than I had originally intended. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not gone, as in buried, but gone as in free. I raised you to be better than what you've become, and maybe you still can be, but I won't wait around to see if you figure it out. I love you enough to leave you with the silence you earned. The taxi arrived 5 minutes early. The driver, a woman with kind eyes and a steady grip on the wheel, helped me load the suitcase. She didn't ask why I was moving. She didn't need to. I think women like us can spot the outlines of each other's exits. "Big day?" she asked, as we merged onto the main road. "Yes," I said, "but not sad." "Good," she replied. "There are enough sad days already." The senior co-op was nestled behind a church and 2 blocks from a small grocery store. The complex wasn't glamorous, but it had dignity. Stucco walls, trimmed hedges, and windows that weren't all sealed shut with worry. Daniel was waiting near the leasing office, a folder tucked under his arm. He looked like someone who had just exhaled after holding a breath for too long. "Welcome home," he said. I nodded. "That's the plan." He helped me settle in. The apartment was a simple 1-bedroom, beige walls, wooden floors, and a window that looked out onto the community garden. No one had planted yet. It was still early spring, the soil dark and restless. Daniel showed me the paperwork, confirmation of my lease, my accounts safely transitioned, emergency contacts updated. "Nothing ties back to Jason unless you want it to," he said. "No one else has keys." I slid the new set across the counter and gripped the edge of the table. "This feels strange." He gave me a look I didn't expect. Soft, understanding, not legal at all. "That's because it's the first time in a long time you've chosen yourself." That evening, I unpacked the small things first. My teacup, a framed photo of Gerald, a stack of books I'd promised myself I would reread someday. I lined the shelves slowly, letting the rhythm of arrangement soothe me. I stood in the middle of the room afterward, turning in a slow circle. No one would burst in here. No one would replace my things, or lock a drawer, or decide for me where I would sleep next. Every object had its place, including me. Around 8 p.m. I made a cup of tea and opened the window. The air smelled like soil and wet cement. Someone nearby was laughing, an older man calling out bingo numbers on a patio across the garden. A small girl's voice chimed back. "You skipped G49. They both laughed, and I smiled. Not because it was perfect, not because it was finished, but because I'd made it through. The first night in the new apartment was full of unfamiliar sounds. Pipes knocking faintly in the walls, wind grazing the window panes, distant footsteps from the unit above. None of them frightened me. In fact, they felt strangely reassuring. They weren't signs of intrusion, but proof that I existed within something again. A building, a life, a place where nothing was expected of me but presence. I'd forgotten what that felt like. The bed was smaller than the one at Jason's house, but softer. I curled beneath a new cotton quilt, lavender, with white leaves stitched across the surface, and stared at the ceiling until my eyelids became too heavy to hold up the day. No one knocked on the door. No one stood outside asking what I needed, only to ignore the answer. I slept through the night. And when I woke, the sun was touching the far wall like a welcome mat. That morning, I brewed my tea, slowly. My hands still had their morning tremble. The aftershock of the stroke hadn't disappeared, but I was steadier now, not just in body, in direction. I stepped out into the shared courtyard for the first time around 9 a.m. The garden was still bare, but the soil had been tilled. Earth turned in even rows. A few laminated signs were staked into the beds. Tomatoes, mint, zinnias. I ran my hand along the edge of one, feeling its edge with a kind of reverence. This wasn't just a shared patch of dirt. It was something people had touched and planned for. No one planned this space without you. They built it assuming you'd be part of it. A woman in a blue sun visor waved from across the courtyard. "New here?" "Yes," I said. "Just moved in yesterday." She smiled and tilted her head toward the garden. "You can claim a row if you want. Nobody guards the lettuce." I chuckled. "Maybe I'll start with mint." "Good choice," she said. "Strong and hard to kill." By the afternoon, I'd already started lining the kitchen shelves with little comforts, my 3 ceramic mugs, a spice rack Ruth gave me, and the radio I'd nearly thrown away twice, but kept because Gerald's voice had once passed through it on a scratchy voicemail I couldn't bring myself to delete. It still played, crackly and old, but true. I found myself humming along to a Sinatra song I hadn't heard in years. It came back to me like breath, automatic, warm. Later that evening, I sat by the window with a bowl of soup and a notepad. I'd started writing again, not just lists or letters, but thoughts, memories, things I hadn't had space to name when every moment had felt like a negotiation for work. Tonight's page started with, "What happens to a woman who remembers herself after the world decides she's optional?" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Not yet. Around 8:30 p.m., the intercom buzzed. It startled me, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the wall and pressed the button. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a familiar voice. "Mom." "Jason." I stood still, hand hovering over the button. He said, voice tight. I saw the letter. I didn't know what to do. I drove around for an hour. I said nothing. "Can I come up?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked myself a question I hadn't in a while. Do I owe him this? No. But I pressed the door release anyway. When he stepped into the apartment, he looked smaller. Not physically. Jason was still broad-shouldered, hair neat, suit coat stiff at the shoulders, but something about him had contracted. He didn't carry flowers, not even a question. Just himself. "Nice place," he said. I sat down across from him, keeping the coffee table between us. My tea had gone cold. "I didn't expect you." I didn't expect me either." He glanced around. "I've been thinking about everything. You, the house, what I did." I waited. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said. "No," I said. "You were trying to remove me without having to look like the bad guy." He looked down. "I thought I was being efficient. That's the problem, Jason. I'm not a spreadsheet." He nodded, slowly. Then, unexpectedly, his voice cracked. "Alicia says I need to work on how I love people. I don't know how to fix what I did." "You don't fix it," I said. "You learn from it. And you accept the distance that comes with consequences." He looked up at me. "So, this is it?" "This is me," I said, motioning to the room, the silence, the calm. "And I'm not up for negotiation anymore." He didn't argue. He just nodded, stood, and walked toward the door. Before he opened it, he turned back. "I hope you plant something strong here." "I already have." The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. There was no sound to wake me, just the sensation of stillness lifting, like a curtain being drawn back. I sat up in bed and looked around my small apartment, the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the background, a beam of pale gold light already creeping across the wood floor. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. It was different than relief. Relief happens after the danger passes. Clarity comes when you stop waiting for someone else to name the moment for you. I dressed slowly, carefully folding the quilt over the edge of the bed. My favorite pair of slip-on shoes, navy blue, the soles worn in just the right places, waited by the door. I tugged them on and stepped into the lavender sweater I'd come to think of as armor, not because it was strong, but because it was mine. The community garden was still mostly dirt. A few of the residents had planted starts in the southern plots, some spinach, a few stubby green onion shoots, and one ambitious row of strawberries. I spotted a plastic flamingo staked into one corner like a joke with roots. I wandered to the far end, where a narrow row had been left empty. My row. The one I'd quietly asked the coordinator about 3 days ago. The day after Jason's visit, he hadn't returned, and I hadn't looked for him. That conversation didn't need repeating. What needed nurturing was here, in soil and space. I knelt down slowly, my knees stiff but obedient. The earth was cool and rich in my hands. I didn't have seeds yet, but I brought a trowel and an old wooden ruler Gerald had used to measure everything from bookcases to the height of our son's Christmas stockings. The ruler didn't measure inches today. It marked intention. 6 inches here, 10 there. A rhythm formed in my movements: scrape, lift, pat, breathe. For once, I wasn't multitasking care, I was simply giving it. Later that afternoon, a woman named Darlene, who lived 2 units down and wore reading glasses on a beaded chain that swung when she walked, knocked on my door with a clay pot in hand. "Mint?" she said, smiling. "Since you mentioned it." I nearly laughed. "I didn't even tell you which plot was mine." She winked. "Didn't have to." We planted it together, knees in the dirt, her humming an old gospel tune I only half remembered. She spoke about her late husband, a man who believed in oversalting everything, and her grown daughter, who lived across the country. "She thinks I'm fragile," Darlene said, tucking the last of the mince roots into place. "But the only thing breaking these days is how people see me." I understood. The next day, I received a card in the mail, handwritten, no return address. It read, "Mom, I won't pretend this fixes things, but I want to learn how to listen now. If you're ever willing to let me try, I'll come as a son, not a supervisor. Jason." I held the card for a long time, not to memorize it, not to forgive it, just to feel the texture of effort in someone else's hand. I didn't write back, but I placed the card in the small wooden box under my bed, the one I'd started filling with things that mattered again. Letters, photos, a few ribbons from the garden club notice board, even the first mint clipping Darlene had snipped for me with her crooked pruning shears. By the end of the week, my plot had sprouted with tiny green promises. Daniel stopped by one afternoon to drop off a revised set of living documents, simplified, fortified. We sat on the bench beside the garden afterward, watching the wind tug at the clothespins on a neighbor's line. He asked, "Do you miss it?" I looked at him. "Miss what?" "Everything you left behind." I thought about it, really thought about it. "I miss the version of myself I was pretending to be," I said, "but not the pretending." He smiled and leaned back. "That sounds like someone who's finally at home." I didn't answer. I just reached down and patted the soft dirt beside me. The garden didn't care about the strokes I'd endured, or the betrayals I'd shed. It didn't need apologies or explanations. It only asked, "Will you try again today?" And that was enough. Sunday mornings had a different rhythm in the co-op. No alarms, no appointments, no one knocking to see if you'd taken your pills. Just the faint clink of mugs in nearby kitchens, the flutter of laundry lines swaying under soft spring wind, and the occasional gospel hum from someone's open window. I took my tea outside again, like I had each day since planting the mint. It had doubled in size, strong green stems poking out like it wanted to show off. I pinched a leaf, rubbed it between my fingers, and inhaled. Sharp. Alive. On. The co-op garden wasn't tidy, not really. There was a pleasant messiness to it. Slightly crooked rows, reused containers, marker labels that had started to fade, but it was real. People planted things that didn't match, and grew them anyway. Maybe that's why I belonged here. Mid-morning, I baked. I hadn't in a long time, not since before the stroke. It took me twice as long to measure and mix now. But that didn't bother me. I moved slowly on purpose, allowing the act to be something sacred rather than utilitarian. Flour dusted the counter like snow and softened the edges of the day. It wasn't a grand recipe, just the simple apple cinnamon bread Gerald used to ask for every fall. I'd memorized it long ago, and though my hands weren't as steady as they once were, the motion still lived in my body. Halfway through, I turned on the radio. Billie Holiday's voice floated through the kitchen like silk unraveling across memory. I didn't sing along. I just let it settle over me. Darlene stopped by right after lunch. "You've been holding out," she said, biting into a still warm slice of the bread I handed her on the porch. "This is criminally good." I laughed. "It's just something old I remembered how to do." "Well, honey, keep remembering. The rest of us wouldn't mind forgetting our diets if this is the trade." We sat on the bench beside the raised herb beds. She told me about her daughter's upcoming visit and how she was dreading it, not because she didn't love her, but because she hated pretending to be grateful for long-distance concern. "She's always acting like flying, and once every 2 years absolves her from asking me anything real." I nodded. "They mean well. But sometimes meaning well looks a lot like erasure." Darlene sighed. "At least here I don't have to fake being fine." We clinked paper cups of lemonade and sat in silence for a while. Two women, no longer background characters in someone else's story. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Not urgent, not rehearsed, just curious. When I opened it, Ruth stood there, a brown grocery bag balanced on one hip. "You didn't think I'd let you live 5 miles from me and not drop by unannounced, did you?" She didn't wait for an answer, just marched in, kicked off her sandals, and set the bag on the kitchen table. "Bananas, a newspaper, and a plant I couldn't keep alive. It's yours now." I laughed so hard, I nearly cried. We sat, and I made her tea while she flipped through the classifieds and pointed out a free piano 3 towns over. "Remember when you played that awful rendition of Chopsticks for the talent show?" I still maintain that was a modern jazz interpretation. Ruth cackled. "You were 15 and full of bravado, still are, some days." I let that sit with me. Because maybe I was. That evening, I wrote a short note to myself, just 4 words. "You came back whole." I folded the paper and slid it into the wooden box, nestled between Jason's letter and Darlene's mint clipping. As the sun lowered, I opened the window one last time and watched the sky soften into pastels. Somewhere down the hall, a record was playing. Louis Armstrong this time. It floated through the building like it belonged to all of us. I sipped my tea and rested my feet on the windowsill. Outside, my mint stirred in the breeze. Alive. Rooted. Mine.